From a defabricated solar-powered garden shed in Rockland County, New York, USA, this is Stand Up with Pete Dominic. On today's episode, how to rev up the excitement at your next outdoor party by shooting down that spy balloon. And now, the podcast host who doesn't care about spy balloons because he is already well spied on by basement-dwelling trolls, Pete Dominic!
Yes, thank you, Pete Co., and thank you for joining me today. I have a great episode of Stand Up coming your way. Two excellent guests. It is Monday, and I got Maura Quint back for Maura Mondays, and coming up after that, a great conversation, a return appearance with Jessie Gender, who is a massive influencer on YouTube and elsewhere. She talks about nuance and nerdy and focuses on issues facing the LGBTQ community. She's transgender herself, focuses a lot on the transgender specific community, and I love talking to her. Super smart. Great conversation with her. So if you want to skip ahead to this conversation about transgender issues, that starts at 48 minutes. I hope that you had a great weekend. I'm excited for another excellent week here on Stand Up. Did you know that if you live to be about 80 years old, that means you get about how many weeks of life? Around 4,000 weeks of life. And I mention that because I'm obsessed with this new book by a guy named Oliver Burkeman called 4,000 Weeks. Val had started reading it. I heard about it elsewhere. I told her about it. She's like, I've already got that book. 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals, draws from the premise that the average human lifespan is absurdly, terrifyingly, and insultingly short. It's a philosophical exploration of the modern relationship with time, along with how humans can make the most of a finite existence. A New York Times bestseller, and I am really, really enjoying it. I'm going to talk more about it. I'm going to try to get him on, but I highly recommend that you go get that book right now. And of course, I want this daily show to help you, along with myself, learn and live and laugh each day. And I want us to be able to understand how to do that better, more efficiently, with more joy every day as well. And so in my effort to do just that, I'm going to share with you guests, conversations, and even clips of things that I'm finding that are really beneficial and helpful to me, which is why I'm going to play like 6 minutes of this guy, Oliver Burkeman, from YouTube, where he suggests his 3 top tips that make the most out of our time. Again, his book is 4,000 Weeks, Time and How You Use It. It's been very impactful on the way I've been thinking about all of it, and I thought you'd like this. If not, if this isn't what you're into, if you've got a complete handle on your time and feel like everything's under control, no piles of tasks, no feeling like you're missing out or are too far behind or constantly overwhelmed, this isn't for you, and congratulations. But for the rest of us, I think you might like this.
One of the arguments I try to make in the book is that a big reason so many of us struggle with time, and specifically with this feeling that we're never quite getting around to the things that matter the most to us, it's because we spend our lives chasing this feeling of mastery or control over our time that, in fact, we're never going to achieve. So we want to become the kind of people who can stay on top of everything, who can handle any obligation that might be thrown at us, who have all sorts of time in the day to pursue other ambitions or to, implement great morning routines or habits that we think will make us into better people. Or we want a certain kind of confidence and control about the future. We want to know that, okay, we know how things are headed here and we're in control of how things are going to unfold. But the truth is that we are finite humans with incredibly limited time in a world of infinite inputs, infinite possibilities. There'll always be another email. There'll always be another obligation. And similarly, we can't actually have any idea what's going to happen next week, next month, really even next minute, however much we wish we had that feeling of control. So I argue that if we sort of acknowledge this and face our finitude and drop back down into reality, it's not a counsel of despair. It's not a reason for thinking that you can never do anything good in life. Actually, it's the opposite. It's exactly how to start doing some good and meaningful things in life, because you get to put aside this impossible quest to get your life in working order with regard to time and just focus instead on doing a few things, not everything, but a few things that really count. Okay, so how could you implement this in your day-to-day life? 3 suggestions. One of them is to give up this futile quest to clear the decks. I know a lot of us, and me for many years, we spend our working day, we come in, we think, I'll just get all these emails and all these little annoying things that are tugging at my attention. We'll just get them out of the way first. And then there'll be this beautiful expanse of time and focus to really get stuck into what counts the most. It never happens, again, because the decks will never be clear. And actually, it's worse than that, as I talk about in the book. The act of trying to clear the decks makes them fill up again faster. So the only way to handle this situation is to surrender, to say, I'm not going to try to clear the decks before I get stuck into something important. I'm going to start the day with an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. It doesn't need to be vast. But first, focusing on something that I know really matters to me and will really sort of move the needle, as they say. And then later in the day, sure, I'm going to nominate a fixed amount of time. Maybe it's an hour, maybe it's 2 hours, when I'm going to turn to all those other debt clearing things. Only I'm not going to think that I'm going to get to the end of them. I'm not going to actually try to clear the decks. I'm just going to work on them for a while. In other words, it's less like trying to climb up to the summit of a mountain and then you're like, I've done it all. It's much more like gardening, right? Where you water the plants every day, and you sort of keep the soil turned over, but you don't imagine that you're ever going to finish it. You just maintain it. You just make sure you pay attention to it for a small amount of time on a regular basis. Second idea is to think of your life in terms of domains, right? Maybe there's work, home, maybe fitness and exercise and health, whatever. And then pick only one big goal in each domain at a time that you're going to focus on, and that you won't move on to others until that one is complete. So say you've got like 4 big home improvement projects that you think are all really important. You're going to make much more progress on them if you completely give up hope of making any progress on 3 of them for now, while you focus on one and see it through to completion and then move on to another. We don't like thinking in this way, right? Because it feels uncomfortable. Neglecting stuff feels uncomfortable because when we can tell ourselves that we've got a finger in every pie, we're taking care of business, it's all ticking over, it feels like we're achieving this control, this mastery over our time. But it doesn't work. What actually happens is you sort of dissipate your energy over all the projects, and you make less progress. And then finally, third tip I would say is to embrace what I and other people have called the joy of missing out. We hear all the time these days about the fear of missing out, which is this idea that thanks partly to technology, we're always aware of and tormented by all the events we could be at instead of the one that we're at, all the people we could be dating, all the jobs we could be working in. And so we never get to really wholeheartedly commit and enjoy what we're doing because of all these other tormenting possibilities. But the implication in the idea of the fear of missing out is that you might be able to somehow get over it and not miss out on things. Whereas what I want to say is that missing out is completely, unavoidably inevitable. You don't need to fear it because it's guaranteed. If you're a finite human in an effectively infinite world, every decision to do anything with an hour of your day is automatically a decision to miss out on a million other things. And if you can glimpse this fact a little bit more, if you can fall into this way of thinking, it's incredibly liberating and energizing, because you come to see that when you decide to do something consciously with an hour of your life or a day of your life, knowing that you're inevitably neglecting all sorts of other things, many of which might be really important, it's kind of like an affirmation. You're sort of saying, you know what? I choose to spend the afternoon taking my kid to the playground, or I choose to spend this evening reading this novel that I really want to read. And I'm very deliberately saying, you know, I'm a finite human. I can only do so much. And it actually lends more meaning to the experience that you put a stake in the ground and say, I can't do more than one thing with this time, and this is the thing I choose to do. So anyway, there's much more in the book, of course, and I really hope you enjoy reading it.
Well, there you go. Oliver Burkeman, thank you very much. 4,000 Weeks. What did you think of that? Was that too long of a clip to play? Was it jarring to hear that kind of a thing on the show? Was it so helpful and such a breakthrough to hear that it was worth your subscription? Where are you on the spectrum? Because I'll play clips like that from time to time, these kind of positive thinking, helpful, almost anti-self-help stuff, because it's far more realistic. I think it's really good, and I loved it, and so let me know what you think. Standupwithpete@gmail.com, or any number of ways to contact me. All right. Now I want to get to just a couple of news stories and then my guests. First and foremost, this whole spy balloon situation that took place over the weekend. It was shot down on Saturday, and then a whole bunch of Republicans came out, critics of Joe Biden, and said that he's making us look weak, and what was he thinking, not shooting it down. And then, of course, more news came out that there were like 3 spy balloons when Trump was president, but that Trump never said anything and apparently never even knew. They didn't even bother to tell him for what other reason. Maybe it's because they knew that he had a bank account in China. I think that's probably worth remembering. Plus, they fast-tracked a few patents for his daughter, Ivanka. Also probably worth mentioning and thinking about whenever you hear Trump talking tough on China or people talking tough on Joe Biden saying that he's weak. Probably worth remembering. But I'm so tired of the kind of pointing out of hypocrisy that when Republicans didn't care at all when Trump did it and now they're going after Biden. It's tiresome, so I almost feel like I don't want to do it that much anymore. I mean, I'd rather continue to have the thoughtful conversations that I have here and read long-form articles and try to learn the nuance and details about these more complex issues rather than getting in the partisan sniping fight that really doesn't often go too many places. I engage in it. I'll engage in it, but I'm trying not to traffic in that so much more because I'm not sure how much of a difference it makes to point out these hypocrisies, contradictions, and idiosyncrasies, to say the least. And in that vein, I just want to read to you now. I mean, I'm taking a lot of chances here, playing a long clip and now reading like 3 minutes of this column, but Bill B in DC sent this to me. I read David Frum and Juliet Karam in The Atlantic, but I really liked, and those were both great articles about the Chinese balloon, but I really liked this article from Sebastian Malaby titled, "China's Suspected Spy Balloon is the Perfect Symbol of Its Clumsiness," and I just want to read a little bit of it to you. To understand how a balloon, at once menacing and farcically Zeppelin retro, might become a defining image of the new Cold War, consider how this alleged Chinese spy contraption captured both sides of the present moment. Before it was downed off the coast of South Carolina by a U.S. fighter aircraft on Saturday, the balloon was provocative enough to cause Secretary of State Antony Blinken to postpone a much-anticipated trip to Beijing. But it was also clumsy enough to symbolize China's immense capacity to blunder, a tendency that the President Biden's team has lately exploited to devastating effect. 2 years ago, when Biden assumed office, China believed that it was overtaking the United States technologically, intimidating it militarily, and winning the race for global respect and popularity against an exhausted, divided America. Today, in a remarkable turnaround, China is the country that veers between COVID-19 lockdowns and casual sacrifice of elders, between clobbering its real estate sector and coddling it, between persecuting its entrepreneurial champions and promising to make nice. And on the foreign policy side, meanwhile, the Biden team has inflicted a series of humiliations on its chief rival. The semiconductor embargo on China announced last October by the Commerce Department, 4 days after the semiconductor deal, National Security Advisor met with his Indian counterpart, Jake Sullivan, meeting with his Indian counterpart, and announced a series of ambitious defense and technology partnerships. Hot on the heels of the India deal, the White House secured a victory in the Philippines, and I thought this was really interesting. But at the end of the Cold War, the Philippines closed U.S. military bases on its territory, and a partial reopening in 2014 was derailed when Manila opted to make nice with China. But on Thursday, after assiduous prodding by the Biden team, the Philippines expanded the number of sites to which the U.S. military has access from 5 to 9. That will enhance the United States' ability to respond to Chinese provocations in the South China Sea, including, in the most extreme scenario, an attack on Taiwan. Meanwhile, the Treasury Department has also been active, effectively marshaling the IMF and the World Bank to reinforce global leadership, an opportunity that has arisen from China's odd decision to turn a diplomatic advance into the equivalent of a spy balloon that was both ineffective and embarrassingly visible. This article goes on to spell out all of the other different ways that the U.S. has taken advantage of, and the Biden administration has been nimble to take advantage of this. But he ends with, the shooting down of China's comic book spy balloon extends China's humiliation, and the Biden team deserves credit for pushing back against Xi and turning his aggression against him. But at the same time, the administration must also remember that China remains a major power and that the White House better find ways of working with Beijing. When Blinken does eventually visit, the job will be to combine strength with calm. The thing about Cold Wars is that you don't want them to escalate. All right, that was probably too much reading for the podcast, and I probably lost you completely. I probably shouldn't have done that. I regret it. Let me know if you could follow that and thought I should do that more. Anyway, I want to try to make it smart each and every day here on the show, and I want to learn with you about current events and about what's going on in our lives. So that's my effort to do that. Also, when listeners and subscribers are doing really cool things themselves, no matter what it is, I love to share that with others. So in that vein, I want to give a shout out to Matt Carlson, who has been really helpful to me and a good friend to me. He's launching his own Substack and hopefully his podcast with it. Maddie's got a brand new bag, everybody. And I just signed up to support him as he has been supporting me for a long time. Check him out, though. He is a musician, singer, guitar player, songwriter, graphic designer, and now hopefully podcaster. He spent the COVID era pondering deep and meaningful questions about music, film, literature, and art in the 21st century. He's at a point in his life where he wants to make a really big change, like I and so many of you have done. So check him out. Give the Facebook page a like. What Am I Making? A division of Matty C and his ADHD. Whatamimaking.substack.com if you want to go subscribe for free or upgrade to a paid subscription and see what Matty's making. If you've got something you want me to plug, mention, promote something good that you're doing, always love to hear from you. Email me standupwithpete@gmail.com. All right. Well, in other news, the Grammys were last night. I didn't really follow that, but if that's your thing, that's a thing that happened. Also saw there's crazy George Santos news. I don't know if this got covered enough. I paid pretty close attention to the news cycle yesterday, but apparently on January 25th, like last week, since he's been under all of this laser focused spotlight of the media because he is the world's greatest, most successful liar since I don't know who. And even with all of that, he still went and apparently allegedly assaulted an aide of his. Had this guy sitting down there going through constituency emails, and he put his hand on his thigh and moved it up and grabbed his balls, apparently. Yeah. I mean, allegedly, but still, it's the guy that has accused him wrote a whole thing about it. It's pretty absolutely horrific. I read it. That's pretty crazy news. A massive train derailment in Ohio causing a fire and prompting evacuations. Elon Musk won a lawsuit. Jury said he didn't defraud investors. A sixth Memphis police officer is fired in relation to the Tyree Nichols beating. And Democrats are going to alter their 2024 presidential primary schedule, setting the stage for a major shakeup on the campaign trail. The plans for the altered calendar, which will officially be introduced at a party meeting in Pennsylvania this week, will see South Carolina replace Iowa, the traditional starting point, as Democrats' first primary state. The calendar, which was first introduced this past December, will also elevate Nevada to second place voting alongside New Hampshire and will move Michigan and Georgia into the early primary stage. The move by the DNC is a part in an effort to empower more black and minority voters, is what I just read at USA Today. And that is all I've got for you on the news. Let's get to my first guest. I hope that you'll listen to my conversation with Jessie Gender. We talked for almost an hour, and I caught up with her and all of her ideas and analysis on transgender stories and all the things that this asshole Matt Walsh put in his terrible propaganda film. I think you're really going to like that. But right now, it's time to catch up with Maura Quint. She's a writer and a creative, hilarious woman who I've gotten to be really good friends over the years because we talk almost every week. She's campaign chair at Americans for Tax Fairness. Go check that out, as well as the co-creator of taxmarch.org. She's awesome on social media, especially on Twitter at Behind Your Back, and now on TikTok as well. We had a great conversation, covered several different issues, mostly personal in nature, that I thought were really helpful. Had some laughs. It's always a great conversation with Maura. Go follow her on Twitter. Here we go right now with Maura Mondays, Maura Quint. She's back, folks. Yes, she's back. People were very upset. Where's Maura? Well, she's back.
I was upset. Hi.
Hi. Thank you for joining me. How are you?
I am good. I'm kind of tired because I have been going all weekend, which was great.
I know you were just telling me that you had a really fun weekend, but weren't you pretty worried about the Chinese balloon?
Well, I had a slingshot in my pocket the whole time, so I felt pretty safe, frankly. I don't know that I could actually shoot something like a balloon down from the sky, but I feel like if I'm going to, it's going to be with a slingshot.
I've never said anything, but I've been wanting to tell you, I think it's so weird that you carry a slingshot around. It's like, it's not a really efficient weapon for anything but shooting balloons down and squirrels or something. What is this? Who are you?
I am Dennis the Menace. Yeah. That was just my role model. But mostly I just wanted to have a crotchety neighbor that I could bother all the time. And I just thought that the slingshot was a prerequisite. But what happened accidentally was that I turned into the crotchety neighbor instead. But slingshot's still very helpful.
Wow.
It's intimidating. People don't know what to do with you. They see you're carrying like a knife or a gun and they're like, oh, okay, that's a jerk. That's an asshole. You know, like you're just like, we get it. Oh, you think you're a big deal. They see a slingshot and they're like, that person's crazy. Like they're capable of some shit.
Yes,
because they think that's enough and they're ready to go. And that's what I like, that kind of confusion.
Yeah, that's exactly what I would think. It would be equivalent to seeing like someone with like a sword. It's the same kind of weapon. I'd be like, what is this? Who is this person? Are they on their way to a thing? Are they cosplaying? But no, it's just who you are. So you're not worried because you had a slingshot, so you could have taken it down. But a lot of people were pretty worked up about that Chinese balloon, and you apparently paid no attention to it.
Not a single bit. I just assumed Nina was finally releasing a follow-up to her hit song. I just assumed that's kind of what was going on here.
I don't know what that reference is, but I will pretend I do.
Someone does, so it's okay.
Somebody
we can
does.
Keep going.
So
someone's happy.
But I was obsessed with it from the standpoint is that it's the perfect kind of news item kind of thing for right-wing, like Fox News type folks, Alex Jones types, to just be like, look at this. He's letting the balloon come in. Trump never would have done that. We found out, of course, this morning, apparently several balloons came in when Trump was president. But isn't it the perfect, like, look, a Chinese balloon. Why don't you just shoot it down, pussy? You're not tough. You love the Chinese. It really is made for Fox and Friends, I think.
It is also my favorite Death Cab for Cutie album. So it's great. Chinese balloon. This is right up there. I don't know. It just sounds to me like some sort of indie pop kind of thing. It is made for them. It is made for them in such a way that they probably did it themselves. They just needed something, right? Like they've gotten a lot of L's lately. They needed a W. And what is a cheaper way to do it than just like, suspicious balloon? Like that's great. That's perfect. Because you can't prove anything. It's got to be real cheap to mock up. Like it's exactly what they needed. I'm not saying it's all a conspiracy of the right, but like for fun, what if it was?
I mean, it doesn't matter. That's the point. It doesn't matter what it is. It's just, my point was like, if you throw them, it's just like everything's content for everybody. And that's fine. It is what it is. I wish it weren't. But like you have an ethical responsibility with what you're going to do with that content if you're certain people or persons with certain platforms. And some of us take it and we just run with it and scare the hell out of people with it. And do whatever we want with it. And other of us, try to take it a little bit more seriously because scaring people is a bad, I think it makes you a bad person.
But if you don't scare people, why are they going to be mad and angry enough to like keep coming back and suckle at your anger teat? Like that's the whole point here. You gotta keep the rage going.
I'm not the only one who just heard you say anger teat and imagine what that breast looked like. And for some reason, it was like an emoji, like the angry emoji with a nipple. So along those lines, I wanted to ask you about David Roberts had tweeted this. And you shared it, and I shared it too. And maybe one of us saw it from the other one. I'll take credit. Anyway, it's his words, but you can expand on it along the lines of what you're saying. When he wrote, I've said this before, but the most pathetic thing about the current right-wing culture wars is that they are defending a lifestyle. Giant SUVs, highways, strip malls, fast food, suburbs, poisonous, deadly consumer products. That's 100% a creation of late 20th century corporations. What did he mean? What do you think that means when he's saying that right-wing culture wars is defending a lifestyle of something that was created in America in the last 100 years?
Well, I love it because it's the billionairization of the country. And when we hear from the right wing and these conservatives, they are so often trying to evoke this like white picket fence way it used to be, this sort of like classic ideal of what the American dream was that for the most part never really existed, right? This like fantasy of it. That's what they're trying to pretend that they are protecting, or what they're pretending to sell, this sort of like family unit, and everybody has a house and mom's baking cookies. And like, that's what they're trying to tell you is happening. But the things that they actually engage on at a individual personal level and at a policy level are constantly just, what do the billionaires want? What do they need? What do they need? And the billionaires own the corporations. What do the corporations want? How can we make life cozier and nicer for the corporations? what can we do personally? What is my personal responsibility to make billionaires happy today? It is to absolutely buy into this entire lifestyle, the SUVs and the whole thing that he's talking about, and to get really mad if anyone says, hey, maybe these aren't great. Maybe the billionaires don't have our best interests at heart. Maybe they're not trying to make this dream version of America that you keep telling us you care about. In fact, maybe all they're trying to do is absolutely destroy us all, crush us all underfoot so that they can build rockets and leave the planet. Like, that's what they're trying to do. And these right-wingers just absolutely are buying into it wholeheartedly while completely pretending that what they are protecting is something else. Completely. I keep saying completely and entirely. Sorry, I couldn't find another word. I need a thesaurus.
Let me push back on one part of what you just said about, do you really believe that that wealthy people seeking material wealth, billionaires, are motivated by destroying other people's lives, or is it that they could care less or convince themselves that they're not doing any harm or that they deserve that? And the byproduct, of course, is that, the rest of us are losing in any number of ways. But like, I feel like I have to defend billionaires from your assault right there, that they're not doing it to make us miserable.
I wanted to say I have to defend billionaires so that we can just like take that little sound clip and just use it all the time, Pete. That should now be your intro. I'm Pete Dominic. I have to defend billionaires.
Well, luckily you just barely talked over me, so we can't isolate that sentence alone. So I still am alive.
God damn it. All right, fine. You win this round.
I think like an editor.
I think anytime we're saying, hey, there's like some dudes with a master plan and they're trying, like, I think we're wrong anytime we start down that path. So yeah, I don't think that there are necessarily these individuals who are like, here's how I'm going to make all the peons suffer.
Right.
But I do think that, yes, there are some people who just like, hey, I just don't care. But I also think that there is this, there are a couple of different streams of really harmful self-beliefs that go into these, one of which being this kind of like exceptionalism and bootstraps thing that America has and America sells, which is, if you've done well, you did it by yourself. Right. You created something and the other people could have. They just didn't. They just chose not to. And so you deserve whatever it is that you are looking at. And I think a lot of extremely wealthy people have that kind of mentality where they absolutely, no part of them goes, oh, hey, the roads are a public good that I use, like Bezos isn't in any way recognizing that his empire sits on public works, on us paying taxes so that Amazon trucks can move through the world, can cross a bridge and it doesn't crumble beneath the weight of it. He's absolutely reliant on this public structure that is being paid for and cared for by all of the rest of us. He just goes, no, I did this. I did this. Right. I did this.
Yeah.
So yeah, I should get what I get. And anybody could start a company.
It's an interesting,
which is of course very false.
It's so true and very interesting kind of philosophy or belief system that a lot of Americans, people, men, women too, but have, where I built this. Why are you laughing? Because I threw women in?
You said people and women too. I was like,
I said men.
Have we hit the part of the day where, I heard people and women too.
Do you consider women equal to men and the other humans? No, I said men. And then I realized that there's definitely a lot of women who pursue and are comforted by wealth and then also believe they deserve it as well. So I felt like I was letting women off the hook by that. But I'm just saying, I think that it's a very pervasive idea. And I feel like I haven't, but I feel like there's a lot of us, I'm sure a lot of people listening, and I'm sure you, that you're more nuanced and you're thinking about what you have created and how you've been successful and what it's taken. And it's just like, it's a million things. The universe, it's everybody I've ever talked to kind of thing. It's not, I built this podcast and I mean, I've never been in that situation, I guess, given my line of work, to think that way.
No, it's not. And it's not who you are. You've made a conscious choice not to. But I will say, going to like, you want to classify it as men, and for that matter, white men, because that is who predominantly owns the vast majority of wealth, that the billionaires lists are mostly white men. But even that fundamental fact belies such a tremendous history that gets completely disregarded. The reason that the majority of billionaires and people who have this self-ID, the reason that they are mostly white men is not because white men have some sort of like additional special evil gene. I mean, maybe they do, but this is not the only reason for this one. The reason that you're not seeing more people of color and not more women and women of color, so I did it too. But you're not seeing these other groups represented in billionaires is because there is a whole history that has kept whole groups of people from getting to develop generational wealth and to start that. Yeah. So we're just looking at a list of billionaires. These are the people who have had the most access for the longest time.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. Yes, that makes perfect sense. It's certainly being born on third base creates the idea that you created all of this wealth and deserve it more than if you were born into poverty and had to overcome all kinds of things, where you would be more righteous to think, look how far I came versus I only moved an inch.
I want to be really clear about it, though, because sometimes when you look at like white men or billionaires and, you know, what's their deal? When you look at it from that perspective, rather than a systemic problem, you wind up in a place where you go, well, if we had a billionaires list that was filled more equally or demographically appropriate, we had more Black billionaires, we had more Hispanic billionaires, we had more groups represented on the billionaire list, then we'd be in a better place. And that is not the end goal. And that's where I want to be really clear about sort of like, sorry, I've gone off on a whole, but class analysis and narratives surrounding this. The goal is not to diversify the billionaires list. The goal is to restructure society so that we don't have a billionaires list, so that there is not this vast hoarding of wealth by anyone.
Or that it's distributed in a way that human beings have a lot less suffering, which would be really easy to do if you and I were co-CEOs of money distribution, all of it.
Look, obviously, you know, absolute power corrupts absolutely. But I think for us, it just might work.
Well, I mean, like, the point, though, is the point I want to keep joking is, and you tweeted this or your organization did, about like, if only you taxed billionaires just a little bit more, you could pay to end child poverty. That's what I mean. Like, we're talking about a small amount of money that some people have to pay more that would go a huge way. And we've seen it in practice, this policy to alleviate child poverty in our country or around the world. We know what works, and it's just resources are not distributed in ways that obviously they should be in America, for sure.
Yeah. And when you say if, you know, only the very rich or whatever paid a little more, I mean, everyone who has heard me speak has obviously heard me say this a million times, but you're going to hear it a million more because, you know, repetition is important here. It's not just, hey, we need to take more from the rich. The rich are not paying the same amount as the rest of us. They need to be paying fairly. They need to be paying at equal rates as the rest of us. And right now they are absolutely not. So we're not looking to like say, no, you need to step up and do more than anyone else. No. Just because you're rich, you don't get to do less than everyone else. Right.
No, I'm glad you said it that way. And to just add to it or put it another way, the wealthy have lobbied and advocated government at every level to make it more hamstrung for them taxes to be collected at every level for years now. And that is, if you said that to people, if you just said to even the right wing people, I've said this once, and the Mike Huckabee showed his whole audience. I was like, do you think everybody should have to pay the amount of taxes that you do on your labor? Do you think yes or no? And everybody thinks that you should, no matter what your political ideology is. If you work all day and as a linesman outside, hard work, and you pay 15%, then the billionaire who doesn't work as hard as you should have to as well. It's not a tough thing. I just wanted to pose it just a little bit differently, but all right. Well,
absolutely.
I have another subject for you, and I totally forgot to tell you this ahead of time, but you don't need any prep for it. All I want to say before I say this,
prep for anything in my life. Okay.
My daughter was told that by one of her teachers that, girls should be careful what they post on Instagram, specifically a picture of her in a bathing suit. You got to be careful. And specifically, she said, colleges look at these kinds of things. Now, great teacher, not a completely unreasonable statement to say you should be responsible for what you post on social media. But when she said that colleges look at your social media, that's where I said, I don't think that they do unless they're told to, or if they do, they're looking for swastikas and N-words. They're not. And so my daughter really got fired up, and I did the rare thing, called the teacher to have a conversation with her. We had a fine conversation. Again, great teacher. This is a bigger issue, but I wanted to get your take because to me, when young girls in their teens are posting pictures of themselves in bikinis in a sultry pose, that was a phrase that was used. What do you think about that? What should they be worried about? Because I wanted to ask you that specific question. Should a young girl be worried about posting pictures of themselves scantily clad in certain types of pose on their social media?
All right. So I have a couple different prongs.
People are aghast with my defense of this, by the way. I guess I'm certain a lot of listeners thinking I'm encouraging. First of all, I don't encourage it. I don't even like my daughters think about the way they look that much. I don't, but it's fraught. Anyway, go ahead.
I think that I do think a lot of colleges are looking at social media, but yes, I think that they are primarily looking like, hey, is this person posting a lot of pictures? I
called 3 colleges' admissions office and asked them, do you look at social media? They said, no, we never would. I called 3 college admissions. Doesn't mean that they don't, but I did call them up. Go ahead.
That's interesting. I talked to a recruiter once who said that they did, but so, it's not, I'm not saying that maybe it's in no way standard practice, but I think that you should certainly assume that if you haven't locked down your materials in some way, people who are going to be vetting you for various things, whether it's college or a job, or they're going to see what you post, or a partnership, a relationship, or, whatever. They're going to, when you post, it is public. So, okay, that's just a good rule of thumb for everyone to keep in mind. That, broadly, that does not, I'm not saying that anyone should make decisions beyond just, hey, be aware that, yeah, people are going to be looking at that. In the same way that that when you leave the house, if you go to the grocery store, hey, people are going to see you. You're visible to the world, and you can choose how much you care. Some people will put on makeup before they go into the grocery store because it matters very much to them that if they run into a coworker, they look presentable. Other people are like, yeah, I know people are going to see me and I do not give a fuck. And they're in, pajama pants and that's, both of those are fine choices. You are just acknowledging that is, you're making a choice one way or the other. I'm definitely in the this is how I look today. Congrats to all of you. You get to see me looking like this. Yes, these pajama pants are ripped. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
should be mentioned that Maura has clown makeup, and I haven't even mentioned that on right now. I don't know why you haven't explained that to me, much less everybody else, but whatever.
Why do I have to explain it? It's
okay.
My look for the day, Pete.
Like I said, I didn't want to ask.
I mean, you say clown in sort of derogative manner, I noticed.
No,
but anyway.
I'm sorry?
No, so that's thing one. Thing two is the personal choices. There's no reason why anyone should worry about posting a photo of themselves in a bathing suit. People wear bathing suits. You're allowed to be in public in a bathing suit. You go to a pool, you're in a bathing suit, people see you. There's no reason to say this is wrong or bad. This is, it's not illegal. It's not problematic. Your daughters go to swimming pools, I assume, with a lot of the same people who are going to look at their social medias. There's nothing inherently bad or wrong about it at all. And they should not have to shoulder the burden of societal bullshit. That said, this is a fun one for me recently. I am an adult woman who has a job and a life, and I'm very aware of what I'm posting online, and I go a little too far sometimes and go, maybe I don't really want that to exist or whatever. But if you recall a couple of years ago, and I know because I reached out to you at the time, I injured myself. A bowl fell from a high place, cut my leg. nicked an artery. Had to drive myself to the ER with my leg out the window, wrapped in like kitchen towels and chip clipped together. This is like 1 a.m. I was completely alone. I was in the hospital. They had me on IVs. They were rushing around. It was not a fun experience, but I felt a little scared and a little alone. And it was the middle of the night and I didn't want to wake up anyone I knew. So I took a picture from the hospital bed. The doctor had wrapped my ankle and I was just there with my legs, and I took a picture of my legs with my ankle and my feet. Didn't think anything of it because it was not scandalous. It was a hospital ER room picture. And I posted it online. It was like something, whatever, having a fun night. I did that because I needed like connection in that moment. I needed to see was anyone up? Could I sit and look at my phone and reply to people and talk? I needed someone to kind of virtually hold my hand a little bit. And I didn't want to bother anyone or wake anyone up. So this was a way of kind of being like, oh, here's people in different time zones. And there's, people were lovely.
I remember
really...
I called you several times that night and you kept answering and say, not you, Pete. I was like, okay, I'm just checking in on you.
I didn't say that every time. A couple of times I was just like straight to voicemail.
But go ahead with it. So you post this picture and it's your legs in it and
and my feet.
And your feet?
My feet, which are not a part of my body that I feel anything about. My feet are incredibly utilitarian, and I'm so happy that they get me from place to place. And that's the extent that I worry about my feet. Last month, a couple and every day since, just out of nowhere, after years, I get notifications that picture is on a foot fetish website. Come see Maura Quint's feet. I get this notification every 2 or 3 days now. Hey, we got hot, sexy foot content. I'm like, it is one photo that I took from a fucking hospital bed.
Yep.
And it is on a foot fetish website. Should I have not posted that because somebody could take that photo and post it in the place and some dudes could jerk off to looking at my feet? I don't think that's my responsibility per se. Should I grapple with that in some way or have an awareness that everything I post online is going to potentially be used in completely undesignated ways, in ways that I would never sanction or say, look, if I wanted someone to be jerking off to my feet, I would go for hotter pics, I would do something very specific.
You make some sweet cold hard cash too.
Yeah, this was not, I wasn't trying to engage a fetish here. And so it's a really complicated thing where we can't internalize and take on the burden of that when we put anything out there, because most things are going to be taken and corrupted. But we also have to be aware of that because we live in a fucking shithole of a world. And that, unfortunately, for now, most things we put are going to be taken and corrupted or have the possibility of being taken and corrupted. And so I would not think there would be anything wrong with your daughters posting photos of themselves in any way they want to do. And I think they should be empowered to do it. And I do not think that they should ever feel that they have to shoulder the burden of making themselves appear a certain way for the world, because that is a losing bet. You can try your whole life. I've never posted a photo of myself in a bathing suit ever. But here I ended up on a fucking fetish website because I went to the hospital. No matter what you try to do to conform to what society is telling you that you're supposed to do, you're going to fail because it is set up for you to fail. And especially as a young woman, it is set up for you to fail. So yeah, she could post a photo of herself or not post a photo of herself. What if she's at the pool and someone else takes a photo and she's in the background of that photo? There's so many different ways. Whatever she chooses to do needs to simply be her choice, with the understanding that there are terrible people and that's not her responsibility.
I think that is so well said. And I'm so glad I asked you, of all people. I can't believe I forgot that I wanted to talk with you about that. And I put it out on social media too. But just to be clear, my stance on this was, listen, I agree with a lot of different things around social media and posting and being responsible. And I'm surprised you didn't mention that her bathing suit was a Confederate flag bathing suit, because I think that could get her in trouble maybe with some of the colleges she's applying to.
Again, making a choice, a real choice.
But my
so she's
point,
going to Vanderbilt?
Yeah, LSU. But my point was that you don't tell, as a teacher, a high school freshman in your class, posting a picture of you in a bathing suit will have a college somehow decide on you. Because what I said to her was, do you tell the guys who post pictures of themselves in bathing suits, be careful? No, what she meant was, of course, be careful what you post because anybody's going to see it. But I was just saying, you get in my daughter's head and make her think that, that post in her bathing suit was shameful, is bringing her shame. And it's also sexist because you're only saying it to the women. And I just don't think any college looks to say, you posted a picture of yourself in a bathing suit, and therefore it's going to determine anything about your acceptance. I mean, I just thought that was preposterous.
I'm sorry, you were too cool to go here. That's probably the most I can see.
And I felt like it meant, and
she's playing around.
Julie was okay with it. That I addressed it with the teacher. The teacher didn't much like it, but whatever.
No, you're completely in the right. I mean, that is a lot of internalized misogyny that we place on women and girls and young girls. We place it on incredibly young girls. We expect them to somehow manage the world that they have been placed in, that is no fault of their own. And it is incredibly, incredibly frustrating to see us continually reinforcing that. Well, so I think you did a great thing. I think you should absolutely have had that conversation with that teacher. I've literally
never called one of their teachers and to ask them anything. I always have just kind of trusted and supported and understand how hard it is to be a teacher. And I just wanted to kind of just an English teacher. I wanted to just kind of work that out with her. And I'm glad I did. All right. Well, I will let you go. I really appreciate your perspective on that and everything else. As always, a great way to start off our week. Thank you. I'll let you go take your clown makeup off. I know that.
I like it.
By the way, I mean, how many people, I did think this, when you're talking about your feet, I mean, how many creeps listening to this show are now going to Google, your turn?
Most of the people listening to the show, follow me. They saw it in the timeline. I mean, it's I'll send it to you. It's not a hot pick.
Well, I've seen it because I remember that night, and I remember thinking it's shocking that you're missing a middle toe, and now it's just shocking that people are turned down by that, I guess.
The funniest thing, actually, was that I posted that pic, and my ex at the time, who was really unhappy with me, was just like, since when do you get pedicures? I was like, I did happen to get a pedicure like a couple of weeks before that, but are you accusing me of going to the hospital so I could show off a pedicure? It was just an accidental thing. I was like...
How do you lose the middle toe? It seems hard to get that one. I can understand the big toe or the pinky because they're on the edge.
Well, look, that's not the only type of fetish that's out there, Pete.
Foot effer. Thank you, Maura.
Mm-hmm.
All right, there she goes. You know her, you love her. Maura Quint, everybody. Go follow her. Go let her know that you heard her here on the show. Always very grateful for those messages to all of our guests. And now it's time to get to my second guest on today's show, who I love talking to and learning from because she's a big old nerd about, a lot of things. Certainly Star Trek and other things, sci-fi. But also, for my purposes and interests, LGBTQ issues. She is a transgender woman, and she is on YouTube, where she is massively popular. You can find all of her links on the show notes, but you can go to YouTube at Jessie Gender 1. Over 205,000 subscribers there. You can support her as well on patreon.com/Jessie Gender. On Twitter at Jessie Gender. She just got called out or criticized by J.K. Rowling, so it's been a crazy last couple months for her. She's a YouTuber, filmmaker, writer, and she says a Trekkie by birth. I think you're going to love this conversation, and if you do, let me know. At Jessie Gender, let's do it right now. Finding nuance in the nerdy. Yeah, Jessie's back. There should be a song. I feel like there's a song.
Jesse's back. Da, da, da. Is there? Can I? How much can I sing before you get copyrighted?
Well, I started it, so you're just improvising. Thank you for joining me. Great to see you. I appreciate you so much, and I think the resource that you've become for the public interest, you really become an influential, I think, person, and I think that matters. So I congratulate you, and I appreciate you.
Thank you very much. I always, whenever people say nice things about me, like I've been helpful in that way, I always go like, no, I'm just a weird dork on the internet. Don't compliment me.
Well, what's funny is that I was watching one of your videos recently, and you're like, I'd rather be known as like weird dork who's like a nerd about sci-fi and Star Trek and stuff than, having be centered as a trans person, a trans woman. And I was telling a friend of mine that I was about to interview you, and he was unfamiliar with your work, and I go, what? You might know her because huge Star Trek fan and channel. And then he goes, wait, yeah, the trans Star Trek nerd? I go, yeah. So my point is, my friend Ken knows you as a Star Trek nerd first. So that's if that's what you're aiming for, you're certainly meeting that with some people.
I love that. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. No, I found that like my audience kind of has like two entry points. It's either you're a Trekkie, and then I sort of like get you into talking about LGBTQ issues, or you're like an LGBTQ person or care about LGBTQ issues, and then I make you a Trekkie, which I feel like is a good
hey, wherever you want to step into it. He went to, have you ever heard of this place? Some guy has the actual set or
Ticonderoga,
up near Lake George, New York, Ticonderoga, New York. He went there this summer, and I was like, oh my God, that is the biggest nerd thing I've heard.
Believe me, I know about it quite obviously, and I want to go very badly.
Oh, that's I look forward to you sending us all photos or even videos from there. So, man, lot to talk with you about because the last quarter of the year got you pretty busy. First of all, you're already working on this big project, kind of the answer to Matt Walsh's anti-trans movie. I won't even call it a documentary. And you finished it, and it's amazing. And everybody should go watch it if you've got 4 hours, because you are the most detailed person in the world, and you do such a good job at making it funny and entertaining. It's so good. You really are one of the best on YouTube. But, as a result of that, and then as a result of, J.K. Rowling calling you out, there's been a lot of real drama in your life. And you put out this video about how you're slowing down and how you're doing. And I kind of just wanted to check in with you here at the top and see how you are doing, because so many attacks sent your way as thanks to J.K. Rowling's and I'm sure Matt Walsh's fans. I mean, what kind of stuff did you get, and how are you processing it? And have you been able to find, hopefully, compassion and patience for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to go into with all that. Yeah. So with both Matt Walsh and the J.K. Rowling thing, so for listeners, I don't know how much she gave them context. She sort of retweeted me in the context of a Harry Potter video game that's coming out, and me sort of saying, like, we shouldn't be giving it attention given the stuff that J.K. Rowling has said about trans people. A lot of it was just a lot of harassment sent my way, mostly on Twitter, in terms of like you'll never be a woman, you're ugly, you're disgusting, you're mentally unwell, there's literally people calling me the F slur, and telling me to go kill myself, which is always a lot of fun. And it, to a degree with that sort of stuff, it sucks, but I've been used to it in the sense that, like, being a trans creator online, you're going to get some level of that no matter what you do. And when you do talk about trans issues specifically, it just sort of creates a big influx of it all coming at once, which is then all you kind of see for a very long time. And that's what really kind of like sticks in your brain quite a bit. So that is really the hard part for me with all of that. And with any trans person, like, dealing with all of that can be a lot. And like I said, I've sadly been used to it for a long time. But for me, what the hard part about that sort of stuff for me is the content that I try to make is, while I am trying to push back against horrible stuff and transphobia and hate and bigotry, I always try to do it with a sense of, like, trying to do it from a place of compassion and trying to bring people together. Like, I always try to end every video on a note of hope or kindness or trying to rally people to come together in spite of hate. And so when you get a lot of that stuff on videos where it's like, that was my end goal, and you just see people being like, you're awful, you're nasty, it makes me the thing that makes me question the most is, like, did I do my job well enough to try to bring that compassion to others? And I know I do, because I do get a lot of really nice and kind people that almost always outnumber the hateful people, which is really nice. It's just our brains stick on the negativity a lot.
I got to interrupt you. I got it. Yeah. A little therapy. I got it. I mean, I understand that. I think it's normal. I think it's probably healthy to be skeptical and to question yourself, and probably motivated and inspiring in some ways. But I mean, you just really are the best. And if you're not the best, because it's subjective, you're one of the best. And you're always trying to do better. So the idea that you would ask, am I doing well enough? I get that. I understand that. I relate to it to some extent. But the answer is yes. The answer is a unanimous yes. You are enough. You are doing enough. If you quit now, your body of work would have been enough. And I just want to add to that. I feel like, I've been watching a lot of your stuff lately just to prep to talk to you, but I really see you. Like I do. I see you for the person that you are, regardless of any label that someone wants to put on you. Like, you're a really thoughtful, compassionate, funny, smart, real, genuine person. And I think your regular viewers and supporters absolutely see that. And I don't know what you need to be reminded of or to come to that point, but there should be no question of, have you done enough? A rant and therapy over. Sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No, it's nice to hear that, because you sometimes and I think this is a problem we a lot of in our culture today are dealing with. It's like seems like a lot of antagonism. Where we're always sort of like at each other. Yeah. And sometimes I feel like I fall into that too, like on Twitter and things like that, where it just feels like, it's like there's just anger. And so you want to I always try to make sure I try to focus compassion first. And sometimes I feel like I fail in that. And it's nice to constantly like recenter that as the focus. Yeah. Well,
so I guess just make sure you're having, I don't know if you meant by compassion for others, even those that you vehemently disagree.
And myself too.
Yeah. But I think the compassion for yourself is the most important thing. That's what I've certainly learned as I beat myself up over any number of things. I'm like, whoa, hey, listen to that. Talking to myself in a real mean way.
Mm-hmm. Definitely know that feeling as well.
Yeah. So as a result of all that, you're still coming out, you're still putting these videos out and doing great work. And so let's get into, I guess, some of the work that you've been doing. How many people do you think identify as trans in this country? I sometimes try to talk about the issue as giving disproportionate amount of attention because of how many people are directly affected by it. And part of the reason why it's given so much attention is to obviously make money on your platform, to divide people, to get elected and so on. But sometimes I just want to kind of have a larger conversation about how many people actually identify as trans, and how much of a population we have and people directly affected by it.
Yeah, so there hasn't been like a really, really good survey. I think the latest one was just like several years ago. So I'm sure with a lot of the representation that's been out there, there's probably been a slight increase. But the last I saw was just like, it was like 0.5% of the population, if less than that. So it's not many people. If the best example that comes to my head right off the top of my head, if we're talking about like things that people are talking about and then how they actually directly affect people, you see like there are laws that are being passed around like anti-trans people in sports, school sports and things like that. And those laws get passed, and typically there'll only be like one or two trans people that like are in these schools that they're dealing with. So it's like targeted legislation towards one or two kids.
Right.
And you can sort of extrapolate that out to like a larger population. So like trans people are very visible right now because we are being so marginalized, but we don't make up a huge portion of the population. I would assume there's probably more than the latest surveys, just because, again, more representation, more people able to understand who they are and articulate themselves in that way. But relatively small comparatively.
So last time we talked, I reached out to you and I said, hey, what do you think of this Matt Walsh video? And I think you probably at that point, like, well, I'm already on top of it. And you made a real response to this film that he made. I don't even want to talk so much about it, the specifics. I don't even know. My feeling is, generally speaking, any of us who have strong opinions on anything should be able to defend those opinions, especially if we're going to go out on our platform the way that he does. And generally speaking, so often, especially the guys like at the Daily Wire, like a Ben Shapiro, put him up against someone, a smart person, and let them debate, and they wiped the floor with him. But the same thing with Matt Walsh. Matt Walsh went on Joe Rogan, and Rogan lightly challenged him on a statistic, and it was way off. The point being, they never get challenged directly. They control the conversation, the debate, and the narrative. And so you challenge him directly in several ways throughout your video. But my question is, how big was his movie? How much of an impact do you think it's made on the zeitgeist and conversation around those issues?
I think it definitely made a big impact within his spaces.
Yeah.
The problem with groups like the Daily Wire and a lot of those sort of like very right-wing sort of platforms is they are very good at galvanizing their niche audience in a really strong way. So if you actually look at Matt Walsh's platform before he released What is a Woman, which is the film, I think his audience on YouTube was like 600,000, 700,000, somewhere around that range. And now he's like he's almost doubled that. So he's definitely like used this to galvanize his position, and transphobia is sadly a very lucrative business at the moment. So I do think it has a really big impact. My biggest concern with it is I feel like what it has done mostly is take people who are already in those circles and made them more vehemently anti-trans and more willing to go out and enact some form of violence against trans people, be it physical.
It almost feels like that would be a best case conclusion. Mm-hmm. But I mean, some of the claims that he makes in the video, I think, broke out to a larger group, I'm guessing. And so, you know, they're outrageous claims. And if you believed a lot of what he said, I can understand why people would be outraged. So pick one or two and, you know, take on, you know, especially things like the treatments and the surgeries and what's happening and what's not happening in children's hospitals and things like that. I feel like claims and arguments that he made there really probably broke out of even his own bubble of following.
Well, that's what the next piece I was going to get to is that, like, I think a lot of these claims are based on, he makes a lot of claims, as you said, like, that are very misinformative of the situation that then get used to get propagated in more mainstream spaces that people start to latch on and believe. So, like, yeah, exactly what you're saying with some of his claims are, like, for example, you know, he says this both in the film and then in his own videos, like trans kids under 18 years old are getting like irreversible surgeries, like, you know, vaginoplasty, which is, you know, changing your genitals, things like that, which isn't actually true. If you actually look at, there's a list of guidelines that sort of talk about what things to give to trans people at certain ages. And almost all of them will give a guideline of around 18 years old. And they sort of, the reason they don't give specific ages is they talk about like maturity level of a person that like is determined by people actually working with that kid or adult, like whether they're mature enough to make that decision at different ages. That is determined by the therapist, the doctors, the parents, and everyone involved in the situation more specifically. But around 18 to be able to get those surgeries. And something else too, they always make it sound like Matt Walsh and many anti-trans people make it sound like, you know, I could go into the hospital today and like go and be like, hey, one vaginoplasty, please. And they'll give it to me right there. Like, it's like, it just go. It's like, all right, we'll get you a vagina right now. We'll stick it on. But no, it's like, for me, it took years. Like when I was going through it, which was several years ago, I literally had to like go see a therapist for at least 6 months. Then I had to get notes from a therapist and another therapist, which means I had to go and see another therapist on top of that to be able to get it approved. Then I had to find a surgeon. Then I had to see if that surgeon was like, take my insurance. Then that insurance generally, or that surgeon will generally have a very long backup of people. So it took about a year after I had my consultation to be able to get the surgery. Like, there's a long, long list of checks and waiting time. So it's not like you're going in to get it. And then the other big one, and this is the one that they generally will use, and I kind of mentioned it earlier, but it is like kids, they're going after the kids. They're trying to trans the children. Yeah. They're giving them hormones at a young age. Like, there's one point in the film where someone even says like they were going to pump my child full of hormones that day, as if they're like Bane from Batman, like just shoving him full of like venom or whatever, and just boobs pop out. But like generally with that, like kids will be given what are known as puberty blockers. And again, even that is generally not given until they're like close to starting puberty and they've long talked with their therapists, their doctors, and things like that. And that just puts a pause on puberty, once you go off it, you continue puberty as normal. And, you know, there are some side effects that there are with any drug, but generally found them to be very safe for most people. And kids who are not trans, there are many other non-trans kids go on these drugs for different reasons, like hormone imbalances and things like that. But people will make it an issue when it's trans kids.
How old are you when you finally?
So I was actually older. So I started hormones at 20, I believe. And then I had surgery around 22, 23, somewhere in that range.
What does the research say on people having regrets?
So there are some. So the research, again, too, there hasn't been a hugely comprehensive study, but there have been people. So a lot of people, I want to actually be clear on this one, because they will conflate people called detransitioners, which are people who do choose to detransition after they've transitioned for a while. And a lot of like anti-trans people will point to like certain statistics saying these are the people that detransition and this is the amount of people that do it. And even again, that research isn't fully thorough. But if you actually look at the research, a lot of people who detransition often don't do it because they regret transitioning, because they feel unsafe or they don't feel like they'll be able to complete their transition in the way that they want to. So either there'll be people who start transitioning, find that they're in an anti-trans area or feel unsafe or feel discriminated against, so they'll detransition in order to feel safer. Or there are people being like, well, I'm starting transition, I'm never going to reach, and this is something that I felt too when I started transitioning. It's like, I'm never going to reach the place that I wish to be in viewing myself, so why bother? And that's kind of a very, very sad part of it. So the whole statistic that they generally use is wrong. But generally, in terms of numbers, we found like I don't want to even give a number. It's very low, the amount of people, because I don't remember the exact statistic, but it's very, very low, the amount of people who regret transitioning. And actually wish to be like, I am not trans, I don't wish to transition. And the thing with that too is they will generally, I'll make this last point real quick, is they'll generally use you'll see like people on Tucker Carlson, Matt Walsh will bring up detransitioners in the sense of like, look at how horrible these people have been treated by the trans community, and they're trying to shove them down a medical pipeline that they don't want, which again, very small amount of people do that. But they argue that this means that we shouldn't do any more trans healthcare, or we should stop trans healthcare. When the argument for that is actually we should understand trans people more. We should give more funding to understand how trans people need to go through these things so these things don't happen.
What are some of the other claims that are being made by Walsh or Tucker Carlson or anybody else that are just wildly inaccurate or blatant lies? I mean, there can be a grain of truth of something or one situation or another. But then what they do is they extenuate that to generalizing it as being a major situation or trend or epidemic even, and it's just so manipulative and dishonest. Are there what other claims are being made right now regularly that you need to debunk or that you have on your videos?
I mean, a lot of it is like the biggest thing that's going on right now, and I'm sure you've heard it and it's been going on now, is like the groomer claim about like, oh, people are trying to groom children. Again, it goes back to like, we're trying to trans your children. It's very much the won't someone please think of the children narrative that's used to like spur anti-trans action. You saw the same thing, years ago with gay people. It's like, oh, gay men are trying to turn your kids gay and they're preying on them. It's the same exact narrative.
It was always that narrative started years ago with gay men were equivalent to pedophiles, that not only were they gay, they were also attracted to or even exclusively attracted to children. And we know the history of that, and if you don't look into it, it's just absolutely horrific. But it feels like we really overcame that, the LGBT movement, in so many different ways, and gay folks, we passed laws and so on. But now we're right back to that with not only gay folks, but now with trans folks. Everybody's trying to groom children to being like them and being even sexualized and having some kind of sex with them, right? I mean, am I...
Yeah. No, that's quite literally what it is. I mean, a lot of the narrative around this has been centered around like children's hospitals and things like that. Again, that idea of like they're giving surgeries to kids really quickly, or they're getting them on hormones really quickly. But then you'll also see it in things like drag culture, like drag queen story hour, things like that have been very politicized a lot lately, drag is not transgender. Just to be very clear on that, like drag is a sort of performance art that people dress up in like a heightened over the top version of womanhood to sort of like play with the ideas of gender, whereas trans people are gender living our everyday lives. And some trans people can be drag queens or kings, but they're separate things. But what many anti-trans people will do will sort of conflate these two things. So they'll sort of vilify drag queens, like story hour, drag queen shows or whatever, and start to say like, well, this is what trans is. Trans people are like making fun of women or making fun of gender. Like I've been called several times like blackface for women is like what I literally get sent to me. And so it's like they see trans people as a joke, quite literally. And it's very offensive to me to say like who I am as a person is inherently like something as a joke. But then they'll use that claim to then try to create legislation that sort of bans trans people existing. Like there's several legislations going on right now that Matt Walsh and many others have tried pushing, which is in the law, it'll be saying like there's no quote unquote lewd acts allowed in public spaces. And the lewd acts will include things like dressing up like a woman when you're not. And they are using the cover of drag to like say that, but when someone who is transphobic is writing that law and saying you cannot dress up as a woman when you're not in public, that could legally be technically allowed to outlaw trans people being allowed in public as ourselves.
I'm glad you mentioned legislation. That's terrifying. What are some of the other pieces of legislation often getting introduced, I think, at the state level, but now you're going to see it introduced in the House, I'm sure, by Republicans if it hasn't already. What other? And these are the kinds of pieces of legislation that they get headlines, they get clicks, and it really is dangerous in the end and completely unneeded and unnecessary, a solution to a problem that doesn't exist. Where else are you seeing laws be proposed, much less passed?
Yeah, so there's been the ones that I just mentioned. There have been several different types. So there's been, anti-trans people in sports bills, which is a whole other topic that we could get into. But there's been those.
But you cover it really, really well in at the beginning of this video that I'll link to. But yeah, go ahead. Yeah,
well, I'll just sort of briefly stay on the legislation bits, and we can talk about that too. But like targeting trans kids in schools, in school sports, targeting trans healthcare. Like trying to stop like kids being able to get puberty blockers and things like that, legislation like that. You see what else? There's been a whole bunch like talking about trans people in schools, LGBTQ education, using trans kids pronouns. There's been laws that are trying to force teachers to try to use the pronouns of the kids' quote unquote birth pronouns. So all of those things. But the important thing that I want to draw to is we saw a lot of those legislations introduced last year and a little bit in the year before. And a lot of the arguments at the time that people were saying is like, oh, well, we're just trying to protect the children. We're just trying to protect the children. But now this year, we have seen a marked step forward where last year there was a lot of bills that were saying like, well, we're just trying to prevent health care for kids under 18. But now this year, there was a couple states that have introduced legislations that are trying to ban trans health care for people up to 26 years old and would actually force people who have started transitioning to detransition until they're 26. And it shows a clear like, this was never about protecting kids. It was about using kids to create more anti-transgender legislation that they're then going to continually march forward as they continue to make ground in these areas. And yeah, you've seen a few places right now. There's been a lot of like these bills being introduced and shot down, but it only takes one to get through, and they've been introduced all over the country. And then that creates a precedent that then many other states can use.
Who's countering them and how? I mean, and how divided, if at all, is the healthcare community on these bills? What are the, they like to cite different medical boards and what they believe, and often also erroneous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, most medical professionals quite literally follow they're called the WPATH guidelines, which is sort of the outline that I just told you. That is quite literally like, these are all the guidelines on how to treat trans people. We go through the document. It gives very clear, like, these are the different things they can use. This is how it can help. Puberty blockers here. And, they give generalized age ranges for like kids, like generally around this age, but it depends on like their own specific health, their own specific maturity, that sort of thing. So most healthcare providers who are actually aware of trans issues are fairly linked in saying like, this is how we should treat trans people, and this is the best way forward. And so they will almost always, when you see anti-trans bills, you see a lot of like these groups sign letters and sort of denounce them and say like, this is not actually how we think about trans healthcare in any way, shape, or form. Quite often you'll like go to like a anti-trans a legislator is trying to pass anti-trans healthcare legislation. You'll ask, and they'll be like, well, we're just talking about surgeries. Like, which surgery? I've had facial harmonization surgery. I have breast augmentation. I've had vaginoplasty. There are many other surgeries. There's numerous types of vaginoplasties. There's so many different surgeries, and they'll be like, oh, it's like, I had no idea. It's like, so you're legislating about our healthcare and how best for my body to treat my body when you don't even know the amount of things that are out there that are available for healthcare. And then one other thing too, since you asked like who's fighting these bills, and I think this is an important thing too, is it's often trans people who are continually forced to have to advocate for ourselves, often on off the bat. I mean, I myself, like I said, I would rather be known as a Star Trek nerd, but I make all these videos. But if you go and look at a lot of these anti-trans bills that are introduced, you'll find that a lot of trans people in those states like go to the legislative bodies to speak at these forums quite often. Yeah. And they'll be done like within a week of the bill being passed. So trans people often have to put down everything in our lives to go and advocate for ourselves. And often you'll even see trans kids, which is the saddening thing. Like, kids should be going out and playing and being with other kids and having fun. They have to go in front of adults telling them that they shouldn't exist, which is really horrible. We talk about trans kids. What about, people have a lot of concerns and questions around, are you actually trans? Are you confused? At what age can you really understand, how you identify? Is it a trend? Do I want to
dress up as the opposite gender just for a little while. I mean, how do you look at, what do you tell both parents and teachers and others about, how to think about how a child at different ages, I think is probably important, sees themselves?
Yeah, I think at different ages, there are different things you can do. But I often find that, like, people tend to think, like, when they think about trans issues, like, a kid comes out as trans and, like, the next day we're having them at the doctor's office and, like, starting putting them on hormone stuff. But no, with most kids, it's just like allowing them to maybe use different pronouns, to wear different clothing, like nothing that's like harmful or hurtful. And I was actually just reading a book the other day that was just sort of going over some of this stuff. And they were talking about parents who found that, like, they had a young kid who I think was like 8 or 9 years old, say, I'm a girl, when, the world had seen them as a boy up until that point. And they were like, well, okay, let's do that. And they found, like, all the other kids in her grade treated her just fine, because kids don't have all of our preconceptions about like the way things are supposed to be and the way people have to act based on, how we view bodies and things like that. And that kid instantaneously just had a really happier outlook on life, was less angry all the time, like was just living life happier, like just living happily, And the only issues that she encountered were from adults that were trying to tell her to be a certain way, like teachers or authority figures. And that's really where a lot of it's like us trying to tell kids what to be in certain ways when they should just express themselves. And I do find that, like, I think we should allow kids, or anybody really at any age, to explore their own gender and their own self-expression and be able to guide that with a therapist, a doctor, with affirming people to help them understand what they want. Because many trans people don't want hormones or surgeries. Like, for me, that was what I wanted and what I wanted to do to make myself sort of feel comfortable in my own body. But there are many people that don't want that. And I think that, I think by saying, like, everything has to be this one way, or you have to go down this one pipeline of being trans, is, I think, a denial of our ability to express ourselves. And so I think, like, what we should be enabling everyone to do, but especially kids, is just explore. I mean, that's what being a kid is about, right? It's about, like, figuring out who you are and what you're doing. So at a young age, I think it's just allowing kids to express themselves. No hormones or surgeries needed. I mean, they're not going through puberty yet. Like, who cares? And then when they get to a certain age, when maybe puberty is sort of rearing its head, talking with doctors and therapists and say, like, hey, not ready for surgeries yet, but, like, maybe we give you puberty blockers. It just allows you a little bit more time to figure it out and decide what you want. And then maybe once they hit, 17, 18, they start talking with doctors about being like, yes, this is definitively what I want to do. All right, let's start maybe hormones right now, if that's the doctor thinks that that's all right. And then we can talk about surgeries down the road once you're past 18 and whatever the doctor sort of says on those levels. Or maybe a kid will start puberty blockers and be like, you know what? I'm totally cool with the way my body will develop naturally, and let's just go with that and stop it. And I think the issue, I think, is we don't allow kids that chance to not only go on puberty blockers to have that time, but also even have the discussion. And the fact that we don't allow kids to have the discussion at all sort of means that they can't understand either way. Right. And so I think just allowing kids the ability to talk openly and the chance to learn for themselves, I think, is the best thing. Yeah. If you bury that stuff, you're the parent, and you prevent that conversation, you're doing such an injustice and damage to your kid. And as hard as it might be to have that conversation, as hard as it might be for you to hear as the parent a conversation around that, good Lord. I mean, how much more difficult do you think it is for the kid who's confused and doesn't have all the information and maturity required to understand what they are going through? Do you hear from a lot of parents asking you for advice? Yeah, no, I do. I hear from both kids and parents being like, I get a lot of messages from kids being like, I'm really scared because I want to come out and, I don't know if my parents will take it well. I get a lot of that. And I get a lot of the same things from parents, even my own parents being like, hey, I'm scared for my kid. And a lot of it is fear of what they'll come up against. Like my own parents, my stepmom was terrified when I came out as trans, not because of me being trans, but I remember she cried one night because she was afraid of what I was going to have to face. And this is before all the shit that was going on now today. Yeah. And so I think that that's an element of it. I think it's also parents wanting kids who are very anti-trans, wanting their kid to be like an extension of themselves or live the way that they are supposed to be. And it may come from a loving place at times, of the sense of like, I want my kid to lead a normal, healthy life, quote unquote, the way that we think we're supposed to live a life, but you're denying your kid the ability to be themselves and express themselves. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, forget about anything but gender or sexual orientation. It's like, you're going to play football. Like, no, I don't want to. You're going to do that. I don't want to be like you. I don't want that. I have no interest in it. Look at you. You're angry. I don't want to do it. I don't want to do those things.
My dad kept trying to make me do football too. And it's like, no.
Or I don't want to go hunting. I don't want to kill animals. I'm sorry. I mean, you can, but maybe I'm not into that. I could keep doing this forever. But the idea that you're making your child be, something like live up to your legacy. This idea that I've been pushing back for a long time. I heard somebody say this not too long ago. So maybe I've been, but like that you own your kids. Like you don't. They're not they're not. I'm sorry that they're not your property. You can try to make them in your own image, but it often, I guess I'm done talking. It backfires is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, no, we tend to see kids as like, just wanting to continue who we are, but it's like, no, kids are their own people and they're discovering that. And, our job as like adults is to try to help enable them be their best selves and sort of give them guidance and advice that they may not have, but never to dictate for them who they are supposed to be. The other thing too is we also forget that kids are full human beings that like have the full range of emotional experiences that all of us have. They just don't have the experience or ability to articulate it yet, who they are, what they're feeling, but they have the same amount of emotions and feelings that all of us do. So
I think I've tried to do the opposite with my girls. Like, you don't have any desire to do stand-up comedy, do you? Good. Okay, good.
It's like, please do not follow this path,
don't
please.
Want this, especially as a woman. I mean, it's hard enough as a man, honestly.
The one thing I will tell parents to make their kids is turn them into Trekkies. So there you are. It's like
well, I mean, there's a lot, like, it's interesting. I'm sure you've talked about this. I know you have, like, for such a long time, but there's an attraction to Star Trek for kids of every generation for reasons about diversity, as a matter of fact, right? Like Gene Roddenberry was a visionary, I guess you could call him a progressive visionary, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, this is why I love Star Trek, right? I have I actually got a tattoo since we last spoke.
Oh,
right?
wow. I did too, actually, since we last spoke.
Shit.
Yeah, my first one. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, they're awesome. But it's hard to show on the camera right now, but because my wrists don't bend that way. But it says infinite diversity and infinite combinations on it, which is like the mantra of Star Trek. Oh. Which is all about just like we as humanity understand in the Star Trekian future that single person is different. And there's infinite combinations of who humans are. And we take delight in that. Not just accept that, but we take delight in the fact that everyone's different and that we make ourselves stronger through community and trying to enable everyone around us to be their best selves. And that's why I love Star Trek. And that's what I try to bring into my everyday life. I try to bring that idea of like, I'm here to try to enable others around me to be their best selves and try to myself be my best self and recognizing that everyone's different. And that's a beautiful and amazing thing.
Yeah, well, you're doing an excellent job at that every time, every video and everything else, all the rest of your work that you're doing. It is a beautiful thing. What about sports? We haven't talked about that. I have a harder time with this than anything else because I frankly don't understand why, you'd want to necessarily compete as a trans person. I get the conflicts of it and so on. And it, just having a target on you, on your back, if you're competing as a swimmer or any number of other athletes. But man, you really helped me in this video. You really, as you always do, you just get in so granular with all of the anecdotes and the statistics and break it all down. And so people should watch that. But what do you say to people when we start talking about trans people in sports? And, I guess the more controversial one is a trans woman competing in women's sports.
Yeah, no. So I actually
and
very
having
much
advantages.
Find this. No. I find this to be like the one that is really interesting to talk about because like on the surface, I can very much understand why people are like, oh yeah, this is unfair. Right? You see a trans woman who, looks bigger, has like a bigger body build going up against, cisgender women who may be seen as smaller, something like that. And you'll be like, well, this is unfair in sports. And I understand that quite clearly on a visual level and sort of like a gut instinct level. But what it's all based upon is the assumption that we need to separate sports based on gender at all. Like that we need to have women's and men's sports split up into women's and men's sports. And the reason we have that assumption of like that, by the way, is because if you go back throughout history, actually men and women were competing in the same competitions, but women weren't allowed to compete as often. And then women started being able to get into sports because of different discriminations. Women started to go in and they actually started beating men. There was I forget the exact name of the person I mentioned in the video, but there was a woman who like beat a man in a competition. The very next year they had like, well, let's just separate men and women into different sports.
You're talking about figure skating, I think.
Yep. I think that was figure skating.
It was 1902 and 1903. I just watched that video that you said. Yeah.
Yep. And so there's those bases of like, okay, let's start splitting these into different things because it keeps sort of this fundamental idea of like men are stronger and bigger and better in all things as sort of the underlying assumption of these sports and sort of wanting to keep that delineation there. So when you add trans women into the mix with women's sports, it does point out how unfair like these splits are. But it is sort of bring up the question of like, well, why do we split things on this basis anyways? I mean, even if you look within women's sports, you'll see like very different assumptions about what a woman should be. There are cisgender women who will have higher testosterone levels that are excluded from sports. Quite often it'll be like women of color, Black women who experience that discrimination. So there's also a racial component to it as well. But you know, it's sort of like saying like, this is what a woman has to be. And this is the level that they have to compete within. They have to have, even though there are cisgender women who have higher testosterone levels, not even being trans, not even talking about trans issues, that get excluded from women's sports because there's sort of this idea of what women should be. So the question I say is like, well, what we need to break down and what trans people, I think, and this goes into all aspects of society, but sports is the most obvious one. But I think it's telling that we like see this in all aspects when we talk about stuff is we need to stop basing the assumption that we need to split things up based on gender, but being like, well, why don't we split things up based on weight class? Why don't we say like these people of this weight class or, you know, this leg length? Like I'm by no means like the expert on athletics. So I'm sure each sport would have their own delineations and there would be conversations about that. I'm not saying it would be an instant fix overnight, obviously, but I think there are better ways to segregate sports that creates a as fair as possible environment for that sport. And sports are never one-to-one fair. That's kind of the whole point. But as fair as possible competition that is inclusive of trans people and actually allows everyone to compete more fairly with each other, I think is a better way to think about that idea. So the reason, just to wrap out, the reason I love talking about trans women in sports as a way to talk about this is it's pointing out why we have this instantaneous feeling of why this is unfair, why including trans people is unfair. But then it goes to, well, the way we think about this is breaking down that assumption of why we feel that way in the first place and rethinking how we can rebuild these things. And that idea there in sports, we can apply to literally any of our conversations in any of these different areas around why we gender things certain ways. And trans people just bring up that conversation.
Really fascinating, super important. You go so deep into it in the video, and it's fascinating. The history of it, the current state of it. You know, you use these. They use these certain people subjects in their videos, showing, you know, some young woman who was denied a scholarship or something because she was beaten out by a trans woman or some shit like that, I feel like. And then they're very, you know, exploitative of these, you know, handful of cases where somehow people were edged out. I'm not saying that there isn't some fairness or unfairness to it when it comes to all kinds of different metrics that we use. But how do you respond to those specific people? Because you put them in your videos.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so this is something you'll often see a lot of anti-trans people do. You'll notice that a lot of the times they will bring out a woman, usually a young woman, to sort of be like, well, look how this young woman was hurt. You know, you talk about, you know, in that specific case, there was a young woman who lost a competition to two trans women and said like, well, I lost this scholarship because of that. It's like, well, number one, the scholarship wasn't owed to you. These two trans women also worked hard. They also trained hard. They deserve recognition as well. And they deserve to go to college as well. So there's that underlying assumption of like, oh, this was owed to me. That is sort of underlying that. And then also it's sort of like there's spinning the facts too, because that same woman that they bring up actually beat the trans women at competitions later on in that year. But it, like quite literally, she beat them. And also other cisgender women beat those trans women. So anti-trans folks will often take these specific examples of like, oh, look at the young girl who was hurt and harmed by this. Again, playing on that sort of like, we need to protect the young women from the dangerous trans women predators sort of idea. And but then we'll spin the facts or lie about the facts to sort of like take this one example of evidence of this huge problem of trans women in sports. And by the way, we're talking about this, like trans women don't dominate in sports. They're like the first ever trans woman to compete in Olympics weightlifting. Like she failed. Like I don't think she was even able to finish her lift. There was a famous swimmer I think Leah Thompson, who got a lot of anti-trans hate because she won some trans women competition. She won some swimming competitions, and that was sort of like a big talking point for a long time. People have neglected to note that she actually lost like 2 of her swimming competitions. They pointed out the 2 that she won, but then neglected to mention that she lost several others to cisgender women. So it's just very selective facts. And then we'll often like use, again, this idea of like protect the young child. Usually what we see is like, oh, we need to protect the young girl from these dangerous trans people, without realizing like there are trans women who are also being harmed and neglected and turned down. So
that's for damn sure. Were you not good at sports, Jessie?
No, I was not.
Was that a problem for you as a child? And everybody, did you not get picked in gym class? I don't know. You're probably too young. Did they do that when you were?
Oh no, they definitely did, and I was always last.
Oh,
no.
This
is okay. So
somebody should interview all of the kids who got picked last and find out where they ended up in life.
Yeah, I was somewhere ahead. CEOs.
I hope. I'd like to believe that, but I can imagine what they didn't. I mean, it's brutal.
Yeah, no, it sucks. I mean, for me, I to be fair with you, I was actually like a 300-pound kid. Like my heaviest, I weighed 320 pounds at my heaviest.
What?
I was
what age?
Very overweight. Yeah. No, I was. I mean, if we're gonna get into that, like legitimately, I did not care about, because I was trans and didn't know how to express or talk about it, I didn't care about my body. So I was like, why take care of this thing that I'm in when it's not what I want it to be anyway. So I just didn't take care of it. So yeah, I was really out of shape.
Oh my goodness. Have you talked about that?
No, but I'm planning on it at some point. I want to do. It's one of those things, like, even to this day, without getting too deep into it, I still struggle with weight issues and feelings about weight that actually, this is a whole other conversation, have been weirdly compounded now that I'm seen as a woman in society. I get all those messages about women should look this way. And so that sort of compounds like a lot of the things like dealing with weight and food and things like that I think all women, cis or trans, deal with, but then also sort of my own journey within it too. So there's a video and discussion I'm planning to do, but it sort of is going to be, it's going to have to be a very, I gotta say, it's
one of the things I feel so privileged about is being in this perfect vessel.
It is. It's a beautiful, beautiful vessel.
It's like, and sometimes I'll just look at myself naked and I'll be like, wow, you really have nothing to work on. It's so great. This is just
perfect. It's an absolute like marble statue. Really, I'm in awe.
That's what I say. It's exactly it's like marble. It's like looking. I mean, and then not only that, just the symmetry of it all. Yeah. In the face.
Do you ever go into a museum and just stand there and people just think that you're one of the statues?
I have. Yeah. That's how I usually get in.
just slowly inch past the admission thing, just pretending to be a statue.
I move super slow in a weird Greek pose. And usually either that or they're like, there's a naked guy with his dick out and he's arguing that he's a statue. Take him away, sir.
Yeah, I'm just imagining the people coming up and like, I'm really, this really makes me feel thoughtful about
I think that they really say when they see me, they're like, is he an adult or is it a child?
Oh, God.
I mean, I make all kinds of jokes, but like everybody has all kinds of insecurities about every inch of their body most of the time. It's very hard, but it's on a spectrum. And to hear you talk about it so openly and vulnerably, I think is really important, especially given what you just said about now being a trans woman. I mean, it's just, there's a lot of complication and I don't want to say confusion, but there's a lot of layers that you have to constantly, it sounds like, deal with and try to understand. So it sounds like it's kind of a continued journey, if you will.
Yeah, no, it's been interesting because for me as a trans woman, it's not just in weight, but in like a lot of different spaces. You, as someone who was seen as a boy for a very long time in my life, you sort of notice how you're treated differently in different spaces and sort of the comparison between the two. I without going to specifics, I was recently at like an event where it was a lot of like guys at the table. And they were all talking about work and things like that and like YouTube stuff. And, I just had to notice that like I would have to fight more to be heard or seen at the table. And nothing against any of them. Like they were all amazing, wonderful people. But like there's just a sort of implicit assumption that like, oh, the woman at the table isn't going to speak up as much or talk as much.
It's funny because getting to know you, it's like I would go to you first. But well, let's see what Jessie thinks. I mean, it's a weird, but it's what you're saying. It's bias, and Well, I wanted to ask you about just violence. There seems to be, at least publicly, known of, an uptick. The horrific shooting in Colorado at the LGBT club on what was it? It was like drag night or something. And then
no, it was just a normal night. I believe it was the night before or night after. There was going to be a drag show in the next day or so, had been in the last day or so.
We've seen these types of venues, especially when they're having those types of, nights, themed nights and so on, being targeted more. And it has to be obviously as a result of the rhetoric that we're seeing from Tucker Carlson, Matt Walsh, and others. I mean, people don't just come up with this stuff. This didn't come out of nowhere. There was, there were shows, RuPaul's show, and there were drag nights, and everybody went to, there were drag library readings. Like, this stuff was not that wasn't drawing a lot of attention. Certainly not disproportionate. It's seemingly disproportionate amount of violence, and I don't know exactly, but it certainly seems that way. And I wonder, what your thoughts are as you see these things playing out. The threats, much less, the threat of violence, much less actual violence.
Yeah, I mean, the drag shows, as you say too, and also just to point out an even more horrific one that Matt Walsh was directly involved in. There was the Boston Children's Hospital. Matt Walsh, along with Libs of TikTok, which is another group we could talk about, they spread lies about the Boston Children's Hospital about them giving like hysterectomies to underage kids, which was not the case in any actuality. But they had a trans supportive center, and so they targeted it, and it led to a lot of mass harassment of the doctors at the Children's Hospital and a literal bomb threat at the hospital, which not only affects just trans kids or the doctors, but all kids at that hospital generally, which is really horrific and ghoulish, if I may say so. But so yeah, it's absolutely horrific and terrible. And yeah, it is quite literally stoking anti-trans hatred and violence towards people. I mean, this is the point that I did another video where I made the point that people, they'll push back on these things like, well, we never advocate for violence. We never say go and attack people. But when you're using the rhetoric of trans people are hurting children, trans people are hurting kids, and they are trying to harm all these children, and they want you to be able to do nothing about it. They say that. And then they say, these are the groups of people that are doing it. What do you think the implicit assumption is going to be? Like, if you believe that trans kids are harming, or trans people are harming kids, you feel a need to protect kids, and you want to go out and do anything you can to do that. That's the way that they direct it, and they sort of leave that last part unsaid, but they know that that's what they're doing.
Yeah. They absolutely. I mean, I watched that Libs of TikTok lady on Tucker Carlson's stupid daytime show where he's in the wood paneled. I like that studio. I'll say that. I do like his studio.
They have great aesthetics. I'll give them
great aesthetics. It's what happens. Yeah. It's the people inside them talking that really bothers me. But the lady, Libs of TikTok lady, I'm paraphrasing, but I remember where I was when I watched it, because my jaw dropped and I was like, oh, that's very dangerous, because what she was saying was, she said, I'm getting close to it, but the LGBT agenda, which you always are great to make fun of, the LGBT agenda is evil. She says evil over and over, and they agree. And this is, they're grooming kids. They're doing horrible things to children. I mean, I'm just restating what you're saying, but even more specific with her comments. When I heard that, I was like, that is so dangerous to say that people are evil, because I think what they hear as evil, certainly different than what I hear as evil. I hear evil in a more secular way. I hear it as, oh my God, this person has really bad intentions and is dangerous, is going to do bad things. What they hear sometimes is a more religious way. These people have the Satan. They're the devil. And we know what that means. At least that's how I interpreted that. And that's just my interpretation. And I'm an ally, if you will. I'm one of the good people, if you will. But if you're one of the people that is influenced, manipulated by that word and by those ideas, that means something completely different, which is why, we're seeing things like the Paul Pelosi attack. I mean, and all those kinds of things. If you think people are evil, like the devil is in them, then, and you're a person who's, you know what I'm saying? So.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you're saying. I agree. It's like, if you believe that, like, there's some moral, in the universe, like, these people are evil, and like to their core evil, then you have a duty, to go out and stop them. And the other thing too, implicit in that, they use words like LGBTQ agenda, gender ideology, transgender ideology, to make it seem like being trans is like an idea, a concept, an ideology instead of people that exist.
Yeah, yeah.
So they want to try and put like being transgender on the level of like being a conservative, that it's an ideology instead of people that exist. And so you're just disagreeing with the ideology, not like the people. You know, it's just when I get that a lot. It's like, well, I accept trans people, but I don't agree with your gender ideology and trying to groom the children. Like, I get comments and things sent me that way, and I'm like, what is gender ideology? You know?
Well, no,
like,
you make such a good point about like the phrase that you hear throughout the years. Is I'm okay with it, but you don't have to force it down my throat. And the person is like, I'm black. I'm not forcing anything down your throat. I'm gay. I'm not part of the movement. Okay. I'm just minding my own business. I'm just buying bread. Like I'm a trans person buying bread. I'm told, by the way, Jesse, trans people don't eat bread. Is that right?
Yeah, I've never had any of that. I don't know what you're talking. Don't bring this devil wheat into my home. Okay.
But that's the point you're making, is that there's a huge percentage of people who technically are members of marginalized groups but don't have an agenda. They have no idea what you're even talking about with the movement. I mean, most people aren't active necessarily politically, but when you're the one forcing that down people. So when this person's just walking by, I think that's what you're saying.
When you're talking about, like, I mean, we could go even further, like talking about gender, like people are like, well, they're forcing gender down our throats. Like, what are we doing with kids when you tell them like they have to join football, when they have to dress this, like what you're trying to force, like this version of gender that they're supposed to be on them? Like that's really like kind of forcing that ideology onto kids instead of letting kids be themselves. So it's very much that same thing, but people are just generally just trying to exist and live. Like, you know, I am someone out here because this is the work that I do. I try to be an advocate. I try and talk about these things, and you'll people like me often get heard a lot more because that's what that's what we're doing in our daily lives. And part of it's coming on shows like this and talking to people like you. But most trans people are just trying to live, trying to exist, trying to go about the day, trying to, destroy the bread aisle at the grocery store, things like that. So, yeah.
I was going to try to make up a few more stereotypes that I just made up on my own. Trans people in roller skating versus inline skating, Jesse. Roller blades versus the four wheels. Where?
Actually, weirdly enough, the four wheels, like roller blades, there's actually a big trans community in roller derby, if you ever thought about it. One of the most inclusive sports that includes trans women, roller derby, which is funny considering that whole sport is about women knocking into each other and like pushing each other down and getting a lot of injuries. Like I have one of my exes, she did roller derby like professionally, loved it. And she was part of this huge community of like, she was trans, I should say. She was part of this huge community of just women that did roller derby. And she was like coming home with bruises, getting knocked down every night. You're talking about like fairness in sports. It's just kind of funny with that because it's just like the most inclusive sport of trans women is a women's sport that is all about women just knocking the shit out of each other.
It's actually not surprising, but also hilarious that I just made up roller skating. That is
a legitimate,
but
like,
you are
actual, like stereotype to a degree.
You're a walking like search engine. Like you just have so much information. I was going to say encyclopedia or something, but do people know what they are?
One weird stereotype is trans people like what is it? Balacas. They're like this specific type of shark. That like I forget the exact history on it, but there's like a weird stereotype. Like I think like a Balaka whale shark like came up in like some sort of trans related thing, and so like became a weird stereotype in the trans community that trans people like Balaka sharks. It's just like there are weird things like that I could tell you about.
But before I let you go, I don't know that we've talked about this, but just your general. I mean, this is a pretty big topic, but correlation on gender identification and gender sexual orientation. Mm-hmm. Did I say those terms right? Like,
so sexual orientation versus like gender identity and like the being trans and being, LGBTQ and other areas in terms of your sexuality.
Yeah.
I've generally found, trans people, so sexuality and gender are separate things, obviously. And I found that there are, straight trans people, bisexual trans people, gay trans people in any way, shape or form. But you do generally tend to see more trans people being, sexually open in different ways. Like I myself am bisexual. And I think that comes not from like there being necessarily a one-to-one core or one-to-one like causation, but actually just trans people are people who have already had to talk about and think about the underlying assumptions about gender. And so are also more willing to talk about sexuality too. Like sexuality is a much more accepted thing in our society nowadays. So I think like the idea of like, well, I've already fought this battle about gender. Sexuality just doesn't seem like as big a fight anymore. And so I'm more open to exploring it. Like for me, briefly, like I had feelings about being bisexual when I was younger, but I didn't know really how to think about it. And I actually wasn't able to articulate that I was bisexual until I came out as trans, because I needed to figure out my own self first before I could figure out how I related to other people. So,
bisexuality, interesting.
Yeah,
I'm interested in it from the standpoint of, you know, do you is it like that liquid? Is it that? Is there a lot of movement? Like you walk down the street and you're like, oh, I could, or is it like I've seen more specifically, almost like phases? Like I'm in a relationship. I know this one woman really well. She's been in long-term relationships with both men and women. I think she like almost identifies as, you know, to me, defines like what I've thought bisexuality is, but it doesn't have to be any other way, but it seems like you go through phases. So just on that, like, to you, is there phases, or is it like it could be Tuesday, it could be Wednesday?
No. I think for me, yeah, it kind of comes and goes. Like I've generally found, like for me, generally, I'm found that I'm more physically attracted to men than women. I'm still attracted to women, but I'm sort of emotionally attracted to both men and women equally. But then there's just days where like, no, I don't really find men all that attractive, but I'm more interested in women. Like it does sort of come and go as like, I think everyone sort of has that to a degree, even within like, you know, more seen as static sexualities. Like you're like, oh, this woman's attracted to me one day, you know, this woman's not another day. So I think it just comes and goes, and it just goes between genders. And then there's also a distinction too between bisexuality and pansexuality. And these are my labels, so other people may use the words differently. Again, like it doesn't have to have a fixed definition. These are just words used to help us understand ourselves, not to dictate who we are. But bisexuality generally means you're attracted to any or all genders, but you are attracted to them because of their gender. Whereas pansexuality I've seen defined as attracted to any or all genders, but without taking gender into account. It's like I'm attracted to someone regardless of their gender presentation. Whereas like for me, I'm like, oh, I'm attracted to someone as a guy in a different way than I'm attracted to someone who's seen as a girl. I have different attractions to them.
That's
as opposed
fascinating.
to someone who's like doesn't care about that.
Really, really fascinating. I could talk to you forever. I really appreciate you taking my questions, enlightening me, giving me your take on everything, and continuing to do the work. I learned so much watching your videos, and they're always really entertaining. And I have so many questions for you, even about how you produce them. And you do such a great job. It's clearly a tremendous amount of work, and you make them funny and entertaining, and you're just doing excellent work. And I hope you'll never stop. So thank you so much, and we'll talk again soon, I hope.
Yeah, most definitely. Thank you for having me on.
All right, there you go. Jessie Gender, everybody. I highly recommend her YouTube channel, and follow her and support her on Twitter and Patreon. Okay, that's all I've got for you. And this show is clocking in at almost 2 hours of content, of learning, of living and laughing along with me here today on a Monday. Got some great stuff planned for you the rest of the week, but I always want to hear from you. So email me, tell me how I can do better, what I could do less of, what I could do more of. Always want to hear from you. standupwithpete@gmail.com. Odessa and I will try to get back to you. Well, I'll get back to you, but we'll certainly try to respond to whatever feedback you give. I'm very, very appreciative and grateful to you for listening. If you listen to the whole hour and 48, email me the following word: Bumblebee. Email me Bumblebee. Say standupwithpete@gmail.com, Bumblebee in the subject, and I don't know what I'll do, but you'll get a response from me. You definitely will get a response from me. I don't think it'll be too much. If not, I'll just have to forward hundreds of emails to Odessa. Somehow we will respond. It won't be that many. Bumblebee. All right. You guys are the best. I love you. Bumblebee. Talk to you tomorrow. Oh, and here's Grammy Award winner of our own, Jon Carroll.